Hey everybody, thanks for joining.
Woo! Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh,
My name is Aaron.
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, my name is Aaron Cass,
I'm Jeffrey Weiss.
and we are the Aaron and Jeff team at Compass, your Bronx residential real estate experts in New York City.
We're really thrilled to have Geoff Hunt with CATES Tutoring here with us today. Uh, Jeff is an expert in education, and I'm excited to hear how things have changed since we applied to college, which at this point is a
15
very
years ago?
15 years ago. Yeah, it's a long time. So things have changed quite a bit, and I haven't kept up with it at all. The
But
reason,
we have a lot of clients who their kids are getting to be that age. I know a lot of kids just started middle school this year in our network, so I know that you said seventh grade is a good time to start thinking
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Why don't you introduce yourself first, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty of what's going on.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited. Always love spending time with you guys. So my name is Geoff Hunt. I started my career in education after grad school at Teachers College as a high school history teacher in Manhattan. Spent many years both as a teacher and then working at nonprofit education organizations, primarily working with folks who were first in their family to go to college or first in their family to go to college in the US. Now I'm the enrollment director at CATES Tutoring, and that means I will work with families to figure out what their needs are, and that can be anything from tutoring in subject matter to helping them apply to college or graduate school, and then help them match up with the right education professional. Most of the time, it's not me. Every once in a while, somebody will have the misfortune of having to work with me. But we work with a bunch of different educators, many of whom have been at this for a long, long time. So yeah, that's who I am, and I'm here in Brooklyn and excited to chat.
well, before we dive into college admissions and all that, I have a question that's kind of off the cuff.
Mhm.
You mentioned grad school as well. Do you work with adults who are thinking about going back to school and doing career changes, or
We
is it
sure do.
really okay?
Yeah, we work with, for example, current students who are in college, for example, and they're thinking about grad school. They're not sure where they're going to go. We also work with mid-career professionals to figure out, do they want to do an executive MBA? Do they want to do a full-time MBA? Do they want to have a total career change? And so they can work with one of our folks. Typically, our founder, Chris Ajamian, would be the person to go to for that sort of thing. But yeah, that's absolutely something that we do.
I didn't realize that was one of the service offerings you guys
Yeah.
have. I love that.
There's
Okay.
our tagline is from cradle to career, and it really should change to be cradle through career,
Yeah.
depending on what people's uh, professions
Right,
are.
because I think okay, you get your job and yet now it kind of implies to adulthood in some ways in my mind, but
Yeah,
the idea that a good client for you guys can be somebody in their mid 30s who
yeah,
they're tired of whatever they've been doing. They went to school for something and now they want to try to figure out what that new path might be.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely,
one of those
absolutely.
what color is your parachute sort of
Yeah,
situations.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
anyway, now let's talk about college admissions, more geared towards the more expected kind of consumer, which is
Mhm.
the parents of kids in middle school and high school.
Yeah.
So, what's the first step when you're talking to parents about getting kids ready? Aaron said you mentioned seventh grade. Is that the
Mhm.
best time?
We generally prefer to start talking with families around seventh, eighth grade, especially because by the time ninth grade rolls around, kids really need to hit the ground running because colleges will start looking at grades and everything else about your transcript and resume from day one of ninth grade. And so it's really helpful for families to sort of understand the sort of situation that their kids are going through. In many cases, we'll just start having maybe once a quarter conversation with a student in seventh grade to understand who they are, who they want to be, what they want their place in the world to look like, and what kind of changes they'd like to make in the world to make it a better place or to sort of bend it to their will, if that's the kind of kid that they are. And that kind of growth is really best achieved with a plan. And I don't know about you guys. I went through my teenage years with absolutely no plan whatsoever. And as a result, kind of fumbled around a little bit and would certainly have lived a different life if I'd gotten a little bit more direction. And that's, as with many things, expertise is really useful. So that's where we can help. Yeah.
I kind of have an opposite experience in some ways. I had a very distinct desire and went to school for a very specific thing and pursued it relentlessly and got it, and then realized, oh, I don't want this anymore, and made a right turn and found myself in a position where now I help people in a very different way. And I find the skills translate really well, but I think it's intriguing to think of what I may have been doing differently or thinking of if I had a different kind of a plan.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you're dealing with adolescents, it's really important to understand that all data is good data. And so a student could take a summer class, or they could have an internship at a law firm, for example, and they could decide, oh my God, after this internship, the last thing I want to do is practice law. Great, you just saved yourself 3 years of law school, and
a lot of
God
money.
knows how many dollars. In order to understand that. So that's part of the reason why we really love it when students are trying new things, that they're not waiting until college or after college to sort of explore their passions. And if they can do that early on, that sort of spurs that authentic growth that we really like to see, and that colleges will like to see as well.
I'm getting the sense at this point, and I think the headlines and everything that people are seeing, it implies that it's much harder to get into colleges now than it was 15 years ago when we did it. And it felt hard to get into college then. Why is it more challenging now? What's changing that's making it harder for admissions?
Yeah, so when it comes down to it, there are kind of two different things. The first thing is just that there are more people applying to college, and they are applying to more colleges per person. And so what that means is at elite schools, they're seeing somewhere between 50 to 75% more applications, even just than they were 6 or 7 years ago before the pandemic. But they haven't expanded at the same rate. So they've got more applications and just as many seats, which means that you're competing against more people. So that's number one. Number two is that the expectations on students and kind of where they are, where colleges think that they should be by the time that they have applied, has been sort of ratcheting up. Gone are the days when, a kid could sort of hang out for the summer and maybe just have like a paper route or a part-time job or something like that, and just kind of chill. You can certainly still do that, but the way colleges perceive it now is very different. They really want to see kids, adolescents, using their summer time in a way that they would consider profitable, not just from a money perspective, but from an education perspective. So the competition is just in greater numbers, and your peers that you're competing against have become more and more scheduled. And so if you're kind of where you were when I was going to college, which was a long time before you guys were there, then you are disadvantaging yourself.
It's interesting because I feel like the vast majority of the students that I knew had every intention of going to college. So I wonder if it's more applications, like you said, per person, and that's what's making it simply more challenging, or if it's actually an increase in the student pool.
It's both. And there are different reasons for that. We have found, thankfully, that a greater percentage of the population from different economic sectors believe that college is an attainable goal now. So we have more working class kids who are applying to college. And that was my career, for a good number of years is helping those students apply, whereas maybe in their parents' generation they thought, no, it's not attainable. And we also have a greater number of students coming from abroad. And so there are some colleges where 20-30% of their student body is being filled by students who are coming from abroad. So so we've got more students, more applications, and some of those students are coming from abroad or from different economic sectors than they had been before.
Interesting. And it's becoming more obtainable for, lower income individuals, but it's also becoming so much more expensive, right? I mean, it was more expensive for us than it was for people who came before us, and I have to assume it's much more expensive for students now than it was 15 years ago. Everything's more expensive. So how do you counsel parents and students around the cost of education at this point?
Yeah, that's great. So when we talk to parents about college and families, because students really should be included in this conversation about money where it comes to college. They should really understand what the cost of college is.
Because usually it's them taking the loans, right? Like they're saddling themselves with debt.
Yeah, in some cases it may be the student themselves taking on the loan. In some cases it may be the parent. It really depends on the family. But there are three kinds of fit that families need to think about. One is academic, one is social, and the third is financial. And so there are some colleges out there that are going to be just more affordable. Which college that might be is going to differ based on location. It's going to differ based on students' grades. It can change based on their test scores. There are so many different factors, and all of this needs to be taken as an individual conversation rather than a sort of a blanket. But one thing that families don't know about, a lot of families don't know about, is that with some schools, the cost of tuition is negotiable. And when I say that to folks,
crazy to me when you say that.
When I say that to most people, they just sort of kick themselves because they think, oh my God, did I really spend way more money on this education than I should have or could have?
So what's the deal with that? Like,
how does that work?
Yeah.
Who do I go knock on the president of the college's door?
Yeah.
Be like, hey, Schwartz, I don't like this bill. Try again.
Right. Well,
I'm going back 15 years.
The first thing to know is that, excuse me, not all schools are going to negotiate. Some schools, especially state schools, kind of have their hands tied.
So where do you have the best chance of doing a negotiation?
Yeah, private colleges is where you'll have the best chance. Schools that are looking for you as a student. So, and this is where your research comes in. So, for example, a class or school rather that's really hungry for boys who are studying humanities. If you have a boy who wants to study humanities, then you are in a stronger position potentially to negotiate. It's just like anything else. If you're sitting across the table from somebody who wants what you've got, and you've got it, your hand gets stronger. It always helps if you can show the school that you're a strong student, that you have other acceptances. So you can kind of play one school off of another. And if folks are interested in knowing a lot more, we have a webinar up on our website that is from, I want to say it's from 2 years ago, but it's about how to negotiate college tuition.
Cool.
And so they can go to CATEStutoring.com and check that out. We work with a CPA whose basically whole practice is really focused around this. But again, you want to start early. You don't want to start, April after the acceptances have started to come in. You want to start much earlier than that.
I want to shift gears a little bit over to testing, because I think testing is a big part, or at least it was when we went to school, a big part of the admissions process.
And I feel like it changed and then changed again. And
I mean, it was changing when we were going to school. The SAT went from 16 to 2,400, right? Yeah. And that was a big shift. And I remember talking to people about our scores and them not understanding because we were including the writing portion.
Yeah.
So what's changing? They went away, they came back, right?
Yeah, what's going on now?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, virtually every school went test optional because it simply wasn't possible to take the tests. And now we're seeing many schools go back to requiring testing. Not all of them, but Yale and most of the Ivies at this point are transitioning back to requiring testing. There are a lot of the state schools have done the same. A good number of the small liberal arts colleges have kind of stuck with the test optional movement, but there's a long list of schools that you can determine whether or not you can need to submit a score. What we tell our clients is that if it is possible to submit a score that is at or above the median score that school tends to accept students at, it is far better for you to submit that score. You can in some cases, you can double your chances or more of getting accepted if you can show them that good score. And so it really just sort of depends on what you can show them. Now, the SAT or the ACT, they're subtly different tests. Students should take a diagnostic that will show them which one they're stronger in.
That's what I needed. I didn't know there was a diagnostic. I took the SAT 5 times. My score never moved. Took the AC 5 times.
I took it once. I was like, I'm never doing this again.
I wanted a
This
better.
is my score, and I'm done.
I wanted a better score. I studied my ass off.
I took the ACT too.
I took the ACT. I got a much better score.
I got horrible scores on both of them, and I think if I had to do that today, I would not get into college.
Yeah, I certainly was not a great test taker. My family was not in a position to get me test prep, and now it's important to understand that doing well on these tests is a skill, and like most skills, the more you practice, the better you're going to tend to get.
Didn't help me.
I mean, there's some tips and tricks that are helpful. It's good not to just continually bang your head against the wall. You want to do some particular kinds of studying in between, but the SAT and the ACT have both changed since any of us took it. The SAT is now digital, and the ACT is heading in that direction. The SAT is now.
I am shocked. It was just. There was a whole writing section, and I had such anxiety because my handwriting is terrible.
So bad.
It's so bad. So the fact that that stressor would be gone in and of itself might have helped my score.
Yeah, there are totally new stressors that kids have to worry about.
Okay.
There is still a writing section on the ACT. We counsel students to stay as far away from it as they can because it does not improve their score. It doesn't get factored into that score. The science section has now become optional as well. It will be optional for the first time this coming spring. It's hard to know quite yet how colleges are going to factor that in. So we generally right now are probably going to advise most students to go towards the SAT because it's a known quantity at this point. But yeah, they're different tests. And so some students are going to be better at some than other, or one than the other. And that there isn't like one diagnostic. There are many different diagnostics. We've created one that we believe is very accurate and that does a great job of figuring out for the student kind of where they're starting from with both tests, and then we can analyze it and figure out, was your problem that you didn't understand these concepts? Was the problems that you just didn't have enough time? And work with a student to figure out from that data which test they should take and roughly how many hours of prep it's going to take to get them to the score that they want.
I want to take that.
I do not want to take that, but you enjoy. Their practice tests.
What about tell me about the admissions process today when it comes to the actual applications and the essays. Is that still the same? I know Common App was just emerging.
And I did most of mine on the Common App. I
Yeah.
think there was only like 2 schools I had to do like a different application.
And I think Purchase was the only one that I applied to that accepted Common App. Everybody else I had to do
Oh,
individual.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, gone are the day. I mean, I had to actually type mine on a typewriter. So that tells you a little bit about how old I
Was
am.
Jesus in your class too?
Pardon me?
Was Jesus in your class as well?
No, he's a little bit younger than I am, but anyway, the Common App in many ways is very similar to the way it's been for the last 10 years or so. There are probably more schools on it now than there used to be. The vast majority of schools will accept the Common App. The CUNY schools don't accept them, for example, if you've got students who are applying to CUNYs. But there's, generally speaking, there's one personal statement. Students will have typically a choice of 5 or 6 different prompts, and they can choose one of those prompts. The prompt doesn't really matter all that much. It's really, by and large, colleges want to understand who you are, how you think, what is your what do you see as your place in the world, how you want to change the world, that kind of thing. And then schools will have somewhere between 0 and maybe 5 or 6 supplemental essays, and those are often billed as optional. Students should never ever see those essays as actually optional, because what they should do instead is anything that a college says this is optional, they should take that as an opportunity for the student to sort of show off a little bit and demonstrate who they are and their
It's
character.
like when your teacher offers you extra credit. It's
Take it.
even if you have an A, you
Yep.
do the extra credit. Why wouldn't
Yeah,
you?
this I would say is even more so. But even if you've got straight A's, you should be writing these optional essays, and those will be geared very closely to the school itself. So it might be something like, "Tell me why you want to study at Columbia or Skidmore or New Paltz or wherever." Some may be a little bit more general, and tell me the best book you've ever read, that kind of thing. But the important thing is that the essays are the chance for a student to develop a narrative around themselves and who they are. The college admissions process is essentially a marketing exercise, and students, families need to understand that not all schools are looking for the same person. And if you're marketing yourself the same way to a Georgetown and a Brown and a University of Chicago, you are making a fundamental mistake because you have misunderstood what you're doing. And so when we see students who are doing that, that's an indication to us that we may need to sort of step back and consider, have they chosen the right schools to apply to? Are they getting good advice from whatever other adults there are in their life? And then changing the sort of marketing exercise, the strategy to go along with that.
What about scholarships? Like, what's new with scholarships? How hard is it to really get them now, or maybe it's easier to get them now? Like, what's changed?
I would say in many ways it's the same. There is one of the nice things is that there's some centralized databases online. There's one called FastWeb, where you can try and locate scholarships that are, you put in data about yourself. You can say, I'm a left-handed chess player, and they'll find you scholarships that are for left-handed people and scholarships for chess players. Now, those are not institutionally bound,
Right.
so those are for wherever. As far as getting money from an institution, grant money from an institution, if it is a public institution, they'll need to at least fill out the FAFSA, the Federal Student Aid Form. That is now also electronic. If they're in New York State or certain states, they may have to fill out a fairly easy form. In New York, it's called the TAP. You can fill out the FAFSA and the TAP together in about an hour if you've got all the right information. If you're applying to a private institution, most likely they're going to have to apply or they're going to have to complete an application on something called the CSS profile. That is a very involved application, and that will open up the grant money that those private institutions have access to. And as a result of that, the net price to a family, they may find that private institutions are less expensive than a state or a city institution.
Wish
And
somebody had
so,
mentioned that to me.
yeah,
I mean, I was very happy with my alma mater,
yeah,
but price was a big factor for me.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
Yeah,
interesting.
me too.
But I
yeah.
do remember filling out the FAFSA and it being like pulling teeth to get my dad's financial information.
We didn't
Yeah.
even do the FAFSA because my
Yeah.
parents were like, "You're not getting money. There's no
Yeah,
need."
everybody should fill out the FAFSA because you never know how your
Right.
circumstances are going to change.
Mm.
And, somebody can get laid off, somebody could, God forbid, pass away, whatever. And the
Yeah.
more you have a paper trail, the more you can demonstrate to a school that, look, my needs have changed significantly, and here's why.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it was so involved for my sister who went to college a few years before me
yeah,
that they were just like, "We're never doing this again."
Well, she went to private,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. She
My
was
guess is
private.
that they filled out that CSS profile, and it is incredibly involved, and a lot of people just have their tax professional do it for them. But
That's amazing.
Harvard now, for example, is offering basically free rides to students whose families earn less than a middle class income, like less than like $125,000 a year or somewhere
I mean,
thereabouts.
as they should. Isn't their endowment like
Massive.
million
Yeah.
dollars? Like,
Absolutely, yeah. Without getting into the politics of it, whether it should or shouldn't, that's not my concern. But like the fact is that they do, and that they're not alone, and so that can really factor into a family's conversation with us when we're talking about that financial fit conversation that I
are you
mentioned earlier.
finding some schools to have like increased in popularity in the past few years, or like
Absolutely,
changes in that way? Like, what's new?
yeah. I I would say the biggest example of that is Northeastern University,
Yeah.
which has what they call a co-op program. So students are learning in the classroom, but they're also learning at jobs.
Mm.
And when I was in high school applying to college, if you had a pulse and could string a decent sentence together, Northeastern would be happy to have you.
Yeah.
In 2001, they had about a 70% acceptance rate.
Mm.
Now their acceptance rate is about 7%. And
Wow.
so their popularity has meant that they've gotten a lot more students to apply, and as a result, they're now an elite institution. And it's not because the college is 100 times better. It's
Right.
probably a better institution, but it's also because people have woken up and it's become more popular, and as a result, everybody's trying to get into the same door.
Mm.
Interesting.
What other schools are like that?
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, all of the Ivies,
Mm.
especially as name brands become more and more popular, the
Yeah.
families that we work with abroad, especially because in many cases their universities back home might be free or very inexpensive.
Mm.
If they're coming to the States for a university and they're willing to spend that money, that $100,000 a year potentially, they want to make sure that that's worth it. Again, the problem is that they are all flooding towards the same name brand institutions, and so that's continued to drive down the acceptance rate. And if folks want to get in touch with me, I can actually give them a tool that will help them see where their colleges that they're considering, where their acceptance rates were in 2001 or even 5 years ago or 10 years ago versus where they are now. And it's in many cases a very stark difference.
Now,
Columbia, where I did grad
I'm
school,
sorry.
went from 14 to 4%.
Yeah,
And
and
there's no
obviously that
question.
doesn't make it like a better school necessarily to have like a
Mhm.
lower acceptance rate. So like, how do you kind of like figure out what schools are kind of worth your time
Yeah.
to?
Yep. Great question. One of the first things I like to tell parents is that it's really not about the name; it's about the education.
Yeah.
And asking, and I do occasionally get a parent that will say, hey, what's the best school? And I say, well, think of it this way: think of what is the best pair of pants, or what is the best shoe? Well, it depends on your body size and your shape and all of these other things. the process of identifying the right school for a particular student is incredibly individualized. And that is one of the great tragedies of the public school system right now, is that the advisors, the clinicians essentially, who are tasked with helping students match who they are and who they want to be with a school, those people often don't know their students very well. And it really takes a lot of research and it takes a lot of digging to figure out not just who an adolescent is, at one moment in their junior year or senior year, but who is that adolescent going to be in 3 or 4 years from now, and sort of predicting that change and making sure that they're at an institution that will encourage and foster that change. So, there isn't really a right school. Again, it's about financial fit, about academic fit, and about social fit. And academic fit can be anything from, are there pre-professional clubs that focus on what you're interested in? Are there professors that, are teaching classes or who have written books or articles that fascinate you? And if you can show that level of knowledge within your application, that is the kind of thing that will demonstrate to a school that you are serious about attending their institutions, because they are keenly aware that they are being judged based on the students that they accept, who then matriculate to their school. And their ranking will go down if they accept somebody who then turns and goes to a different institution. So that kind of game is very important to play from a student standpoint.
I interrupted you a few times.
It's okay. I wanted to ask, without getting too deep into it, how affirmative action being taken away by the Supreme Court impacts this process. And I don't want to get very political on it. I just kind of want to know, are we seeing changes in the process from your end already, or is it still status quo?
No, it's absolutely changed. So not all schools are releasing all the demographic information yet, or ever. But what we have seen is that at certain schools, we've seen a really significant decline in the number of Black and Latina acceptances and presumably matriculations. So that there has been a dramatic effect. There are schools that are trying very hard to make sure that their student bodies are as diverse as they can make them. And especially for those schools that have the endowment to invest money in doing that, then they will be successful, because they will be able to invest the money in outreach and scholarship money to make it possible for this to happen. Where I fear that it's going to be more and more difficult is with the colleges that do not have significant endowment in order to invest in these kinds of operations, because it is expensive finding students who might be thought of as sort of non-traditional, and that process is expensive, and not every school is in the position to invest in that way. Now, on the flip side, there are some schools that have abandoned legacy admissions, and legacy admissions is sometimes referred to as affirmative action for white folks, because it basically, if you look historically at who has gone to many of these elite institutions, those historically have had a whiter population than they do now. And so if you're looking at giving dad or mom or granddad or their kids a leg up, or their grandkids a leg up, then that has a very predictable yield. Gavin Newsom,
I wonder
governor of
if it has the
California.
inverse effect now that we've had decades of affirmative action, where people were able to access institutions, and now their children may not be able to access institutions, where finally legacy could have helped the other. Now we're too political. Sorry, I just couldn't help it.
That's okay.
Get through.
That's okay. It's a genuine question. I think I'd have to look at the numbers for an individual school, but unless unless you've got parity in the current student population, you're not going to get parity in legacy admissions. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of talk about governments banning legacy admissions. Gavin Newsom, for one, in California, has started this discussion. That would be a fairly significant change. We'll see. It's one of those things that is changing, and it will change from year to year. And I would imagine that families should keep an eye on that and base at least part of their admissions decisions on whether or not schools are admitting legacy admissions.
I want to ask about how you work with students who maybe a college or university isn't the best next step for them. Because we know that, especially as it's getting more competitive and more expensive, for some people, it might not be the best next step. And,
Yep.
frankly, you don't need a college degree to do what we do, which is real estate. Now, we're both highly educated, right? We both have master's degrees, so we see value in education, but
Mm-hmm.
we don't need it to do this job. We could do this job, get our license, and be out there and do the work and learn the hard way, or you can go to school and get the education and the exposure and the experience, and then learn how to transition those skills into what we do. All that coming back around to the question, which is, what do you guys do when the student in front of you isn't really a match for an institution, but maybe it's time for career right off the bat?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You're right that not college is not for everybody. There are when a student or a family comes to me and says, "Hey, I don't think college is really the path." The first thing I want to do is understand what pathways are going to continue to be open to a student who doesn't go to college, and what pathways will close as a result of not going to college, and where that student sees themselves going, not just in 4 years, but in 5, 10, or 15, or 20 years. What do they see as their career? For some students, it may be the best course for them to take a gap year because they're still trying to figure stuff out. And I took a gap year. It was by far the best thing I could have done. And I showed up at college with a new determination that I was ready to work and work hard, and I knew what I wanted to study, that sort of thing. But for some students, we will just sort of sit down and figure out, okay, what if college is not the right path, what is the right path? And this is where some of we call it educational advising. We could also just call it adolescent advising, because there's some psychology involved, and
Right.
there's sort of understanding what the likely growth looks like of this young person who's in front of you. And if it's the case that college is not the right path, then we can advise appropriately, whether it's a trade school or an internship or something like that. I would say that the vast majority of our clients do wind up going to college. And frankly, if you look at the data, you're likely to make somewhere around $1 million more over the course of your career if you go to college than you do if you don't. But, again, not right for everybody. Electricians or pipe fitters or whomever, there are lots of trades out there that you can probably earn a lot more than I'm making, and be totally fine without a college degree. But
New
it's
York
also, I
sanitation
think,
workers also make a great living too,
yeah,
and I don't think
but
they
it's
require a
also,
college education.
yeah, it's also worth noting that pre-professional preparation is only one goal of a college education. I look at the world differently as a result of my undergrad education. I look at politics differently. I look at my responsibility to other human beings differently. And so, in some ways, while a student might not need it for their profession, it may be developmentally the right step for them, because they need to live independently from mom and dad for a few years. They want to get to know other people and make networks. So there's lots of different reasons to go to college, but again, may not be right for everybody.
What do you want to leave people with before we sign off? What's your big one tip for families?
Gosh. Okay. So I'm I'm going to say two things. The first is that I'm happy to do a consultation with anybody who wants to give me a call. We can do it on Zoom, we can do it on the phone, whatever. And so if people want to get in touch with me, I'm happy to just sort of sit with them informally and talk for half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. The biggest thing that I think I want to leave folks with is that this college admissions process is different than when their parents went to school. The schools are different, the kids are different, and the process is different. And it requires a tremendous amount of work to match a student with a school. All of that can be done independently as long as you know what you're doing. You don't need somebody like us all the time, but we can certainly help that process. But families should get started as early as possible in getting their students to understand what the college experience is. Go to a college campus once a year, twice a year. Just no pressure in 7th, 8th, 9th grades. Just visit. See what your kid likes about it. See what they don't like about it. Start having that conversation so that when it gets realer, right, when in 11th grade, the anxiety is not piled on, because that's when the anxiety hits, is when it's all new and unfamiliar. So that on-ramp can be a lot more pleasant if you start early.
It's great to know that there are resources out there for students and parents as they make a really huge life decision. In the same way that our clients who we work with are making massive life decisions, having the right person in their corner.
It all comes back to real estate.
Having the right person in their corner is always essential. Geoff, thank you so much for giving us your knowledge and your time today. We really appreciate it. Tell everybody where they can find you if they need you.
Sure. Thank you again. This has been a ton of fun. My phone number is 347-859-5107. You can go to you can also use my email, and it's a funny spelling of Geoff, just like yours. It's GEOFF at CATES Tutoring, and that's CATES, tutoring.com. Or they can go to our website and drop us a line there. Happy to talk with anybody, and thank you again. You know, the more I get, I don't know, wiser, older, one or the other, the more I realize that having a trusted advisor for whatever the issue is in your corner, whether it's real estate or something else, is really helpful. And so I hope that this is helpful to your peeps.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Geoff.
Thank you, Geoff.
Thank you.
I'm Aaron.
I'm Geoff.
And we're the Aaron and Geoff team at Compass, your Bronx residential real estate experts.
Thanks for spending some time with us on a Friday, and we'll see y'all soon.
Bye.